Welcome to the Cybersecurity Matters Podcast. Your host today is me, Matt Rose, and Harry Baldwin, my colleague in the cybersecurity team at Nuco. And we're delighted to be joined today by Austin Gadient, CTO and co-founder at Vali Cyber. At Vali Cyber, Austin is leading the development of a high-performance Linux and Hypervisor security platform, protecting critical systems from the cloud to the edge. Alongside his work as a distinguished security engineer in the US Air Force Reserve, where he manages advanced space cyber capabilities, Austin has also previously held multiple senior cyber roles within the US Air Force, guiding secure software architectures for satellite systems and driving research at the edge of innovation. Austin is also due a big congratulations, as Vali Cyber recently raised $20 million in seed and Series A funding, and is quickly emerging as an exciting player in the cybersecurity space. Welcome to the show, Austin.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. I'm really excited to be here.
Today, we'll be talking all things you, people, and the cyber industry. But we always like to ask the same question. How did you first end up in the cybersecurity industry in the first place?
Yeah, for sure. So I went to the Air Force Academy for my undergraduate education, and there was a core curriculum you had to do. So the core curriculum was just a bunch of core classes of different disciplines. And so there was a basic computer science class that you had to take. And I was lucky to take it the first semester of my freshman year. So I took it very early. And I just loved computer science. I thought it was so fascinating. I loved programming. And then I learned that there was a competitive hacking team at the Air Force Academy. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I want to know how to break into computers and how all that works. And so I joined the hacking team. They did CTF, capture the flag competitions. And I was a member of that team all throughout the time I was there at the Air Force Academy. It was a great experience. I learned a lot about security from that. And then my grad school experience right after the Air Force Academy, my thesis was focused on security. And then from there, my time in the Air Force and then starting this company, it's all been security focused. So it's really from the very beginning of my college days is when I started to get involved in the security area.
Fantastic. And it sounds like from quite a technical standpoint from very early on. Have you always had that technical kind of drive? Is it from a sense of curiosity? Where does that really come from?
Yeah, I think I love engineering problems, math problems, technical problems like that. I enjoy puzzles in that way. And so when I was a little kid, I loved to play chess. I did chess tournaments. And so you can think of chess as, in some ways, it's mathematics and statistics and logic kind of put into a very straightforward game. And I've always had such an affinity for these sorts of things. And so as time went on and the problems got more complicated, I just became more engaged with them. And I think the security side of things is particularly interesting because there's also this idea of attack and defense, good guys, bad guys. And I've always been interested in the military, defense, that sort of thing. So doing something where I can both be focused on engineering and technology, but also be protecting people from bad things. That's something that was really meaningful to me. And I think it fits well with my personal ethos.
Yeah. And kind of, it's an interesting kind of journey to becoming kind of a co-founder, starting your own cybersecurity startup. But, across your career so far, what would you say kind of have been kind of the main influences for you to go and create your own cybersecurity startup?
Yeah. So the biggest influence for me in starting Vali Cyber was my time in the Air Force. And so while I was in the Air Force, I was responsible for securing the nation's satellite infrastructure and building secure software architectures for the nation's satellite infrastructure. And we ran into a couple challenges while we were trying to do this. One of the big challenges that we ran into is that all these different satellite systems, whether it's a ground server that's responsible for sending data up to the sky and receiving data, or it's actually a flight system, so it's a satellite up in orbit, they all run a Linux operating system. And we were ultimately trying to do defensive Linux security. And so we applied different commercially available tools to these systems to try and evaluate whether they could work well in these environments. We ran into tons of problems. There were issues with connectivity problems because satellites don't have the best connectivity up in space. There are performance issues and stability issues. And you can reboot a server, right? You can go up to a server and you can reboot it when it's here on the ground. But if a satellite has some sort of outage due to a security product, you're not going to go hit the reboot button. It has to be something that's very stable, that runs for a long time very well. And then just detection and response of Linux threats was lagging. And I think that's because a lot of security technologies were built focused on the Windows domain initially, and then they added functionality for Linux later on, but that's never been their core focus or their core goal as a company, was protecting Linux systems. And so that's really how Vali Cyber got started. That was the initial idea for starting the company. The other influence was my father. So my father has been an entrepreneur. He's done a couple different startups, all technology startups throughout his career. And he had just sold his previous company called Voci Technologies, which was a speech recognition technology company. And so he was trying to find something to do. He was kind of deciding, is he going to retire or is he going to try to do one more? And then I came to him with this idea of doing a security company focused on Linux systems. And I think I was able to convince him that there was legitimate business opportunity here and it was something worth pursuing. And so I'm lucky to be doing this with my father. We're a father-son team. He's the CEO and I'm the CTO.
Fantastic. No, that's a great story. And also, to have it within the family and your dad being such an influence and having done startups before as well, I can imagine is a really strong presence and kind of guiding figure as well in the company too. How do you manage co-founding your own business alongside other kind of engineering responsibilities?
Yeah, so this is one of the challenges for a startup, is that you have to do so many different things. And I think as the technical founder, you're responsible for making sure the product works and that the engineering works. And I'm sort of tip of the spear on issues. If we ever experience an issue in a customer environment, I'm usually the person that can fix it the most quickly. So I'm tip of the spear on those sorts of things today. But early days of the company, I was also the one sort of building the technology from scratch. Now, at this point, we've hired a team that's sort of working on the core technology and making it better. I'm more focused on that sort of immediate response to things. And so my day-to-day today is focused on those sorts of issues that will come up here and there periodically, but it's also business strategy. How do we want to go to market? How do we want to market the technology? What sort of language should we be using to describe it? And where should we be spending our time with organizations trying to move the ball forward? So I think it's all about prioritization. I mean, there's really no such thing as balance per se when it comes to a career. It's all about what your priorities are going to be. And so you have to figure out what's important and then prioritize those things. And other things are not going to happen. So there might be things on your to-do list that you'd like to get done that just don't happen. But you have to recognize that was a choice because something else was more important. And then you need to regularly think about those choices. It's like when you have your checklist of things to do, if something is on that checklist and it's not getting done, but you think it's really important, well, then maybe you need to reevaluate what you're prioritizing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you raised quite an important point as well on the fact that teams are also so important in how they prioritize and focus on specific positions, particularly when you're in a position which is kind of leading and founding a business, right? How much of a culture how much does culture play a part, in Vali Cyber in terms of, you're in deep technical water here. It's very clear you're a highly technical person. Is that kind of just the baseline for Vali Cyber, because it's such a technical solution?
Yeah, I think that everyone has some understanding of the technology in the company, and obviously that's going to vary between an engineer and a sales rep and someone who's working in human resources. But everyone has some level of understanding of how the product works and what benefit it provides to customers, so that if you're walking around, you're talking to someone randomly, and maybe they're happen to be in the security domain, you can at least say, here's what we do, here's the value we provide. And so we make that very, very important that people have that baseline understanding of what the company does and what the benefit is. And I think that it's also important to recognize that culture, it comes down from the founders. So the founders certainly have a very big impact on the culture, but it's also influenced quite a bit by the people you bring into the company. And so I think we've added folks to the company that do have a lot of good technical experience, but also good business experience and very hardworking people as well. I think we need folks that are going to spend a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to move things forward, and creative thinkers as well. People that are going to recognize that as a startup, there's no blueprint on how to be successful. If there was, everyone would do it. So what you have to do is, again, prioritize, try to figure out what's important and go after the things that are the best expenditure of your time. It's really interesting too when you're starting to get business success and starting to get lift and people are buying the product and all of this exciting stuff. You have lots of opportunities you can pursue. For example, there might be 20 different partners you could go work with to try and sell your product, but you have to narrow that down because you can't work with 20 different people when you're a Series A stage startup. You need to narrow that list down to what's important. And I think we've also made that a really big emphasis in the company is you don't have to do everything. You just have to do the right things, and you have to take the time to figure out what the right things are.
Yeah, really, really interesting. I think you can see it in your own profile as well. You know, there's a blend of different backgrounds and different focuses, you know, from your time at the Air Force to Linux and hypervisor security. I'm keen to understand how Vali Cyber thinks about industry diversity. And when I say diversity, I don't mean just demographics, but I think diversity of thought, disciplines, and also kind of problem solving approaches. How do you approach that when you're looking for talent?
Yeah, absolutely. I think diversity in thought and people's backgrounds, because your background does affect the way you think. You know, the way you grew up, the environment you grew up in, that will definitely affect the way you approach problems or you approach challenges. And so I think diversity in the sense of cultural background and also thought is something that's very beneficial to the company. And I think there's this mantra out there that a leader is someone who's, you know, top down, they're making the decisions, they're making all the choices, they're always the right choices, and they're, you know, pushing everyone forward to get things done. And in my experience, there is a time and a place for that, where you really need to take charge and get something done and just get it across the finish line. But most of the time as a leader, the best thing to do is to listen to your team, to make sure that the team feels that they can express ideas without being beaten down or disregarded in some way. So that you need to understand that if an idea comes out, it's not a great idea, you can handle that in an appropriate way rather than just making someone feel bad about some idea that they had. And that will cultivate people and encourage them to keep bringing ideas to the table. And if you allow that sort of market up ideas to happen within the company and you're allowing people to really reason and evaluate together, you'll end up reaching really effective solutions together. And I think it's very important to make sure you're building an environment that allows people to have those conversations and have those discussions without any fear of retribution or having any sort of impact on them in their career or just their standing within the company.
Yeah, really clear. And I'm keen to understand when it comes to the technical side of kind of hypervisor focused threats. You see it across the industry, the technology from vendors, but also the threats themselves are constantly evolving at such a fast pace. How does Vali Cyber look internally at upskilling and kind of mentorship of engineers to make sure that they stay ahead of current contemporary threats in the industry? Yeah,
this is a great question. And we've actually had a customer engage with us recently, and they want to move forward with a deal, but one of their challenges is, you know, they don't have hypervisor security expertise within their own team. So they're like, you know, what do? We need to hire someone. Like, can you help us hire someone? Can you provide us a resource? Because this area that we're focused on, hypervisor security, we're really the first company to be doing it. And I'm sure there will be many more in the future, but we're very unique in that way. And so there's not a ton of native experience in security teams that have a lot of knowledge about this domain. And at the same time, when you're hiring people, just like you said, they're not necessarily going to have a ton of experience in the specific area where we're working. So we need to grow that over time. And I think what we look for when we're hiring are people that are good problem solvers, intelligent people that can learn something on their own. They don't need to be handheld the whole way. You can sort of give them a direction. They can go and figure it out on their own. I think being able to learn for yourself is a super important skill in any sort of career path, but particularly in security, because there's so many different subdomains and sub areas of security that you can get into. We're focused on hypervisor security, but another company might be focused on API security. And there's a whole different set of skills and knowledge you might need to gain to be effective in that domain as opposed to the domain that we're working in. But we definitely try to focus on people that have security backgrounds that are able to learn things quickly. And if you have someone who's gone through a career path and they've worked at a couple different types of security companies, that's a good indicator that they can pick up new things and learn new things from different domains of security. And so that's certainly something that we will look for when we're bringing people onto the team. And then once someone is in the team, we have various ways to train and equip them to be successful. Some of it is just making sure that they're shadowing the right person. So if someone's going to be a solutions engineer, we make sure that they're shadowing the existing solutions engineer so that they're learning how the team is talking about things, having regular meetings just with a point of what did we learn this week from our meetings with our customers? How can we improve our message? And that's also a time for newcomers to ask questions. So it's, hey, we answered this question this way. Why did we do that? Having the space and the ability to allow people to ask those questions and have those questions be answered by experienced members of the team helps them grow. And then once they grow, they can help newcomers grow themselves. And it's sort of this self-repeating process where you help others gain experience and they're able to help newcomers of the company gain experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly in this context, I think, as we mentioned in the intro, Vali Cyber has recently, received investment. How has the inclusion of investment at Vali Cyber impacted your view of the future in terms of hiring and scaling and capability of the company?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that a lot of the hiring we're focused on right now is sort of in sales and marketing areas. And in fact, we've already identified a lot of the candidates that we're planning to bring on already for the most recent round of funding that we've done. Part of it is due to the investment. Part of it is just due to our company stage. So we're sort of at a stage where we've closed a good bit of business. We're growing significantly. We have a lot of inbound activity from marketing. So now it's time to scale. Sales team, we feel like we have a really strong product market fit. We just need to go attack this market and try to expand our market share. And from an investment standpoint, what it provides you is security and comfort that I can hire these people and they will have enough time to execute and do their job. If you hire 5 people knowing that you only have 3 months of runway left, there's not a whole lot of time for them to actually do something beneficial for the company. And so having that VC investment and having time to invest that money allows you to really intelligently make a plan about who you're going to bring onto the team and ensure that they have the resources and the time to be successful.
Fantastic. I think that really kind of speaks true to your plan and the ambitions of the company too. I think you touch quite a lot on the fact that Vali Cyber is the company for the Hypervisor solutions. I'm really keen to understand a little bit more about, as you mentioned, product market fit, and this area of the industry, with it being so new, is a big part of your focus explaining this part of the industry, the threats that companies could be exposed to.
Sure. So it depends on the organization that you're working with, but a lot of the marketing that we do, we start with, why should you care? So it's a bit of a missionary sell, right? We're trying to educate the market on the problem at the same time as providing the solution to the problem. And sometimes you need to do that. Sometimes you don't, because organizations that have been hit by a hypervisor attack, they know exactly what we're talking about already because they experienced it, they lived it, and they want a solution immediately. So it's very straightforward with those organizations. But part of our job as being a vendor who's really the first organization focused on this area is to educate people about the problems in this area as well. And so we do this in a variety of ways. One of them is just highlighting the attacks themselves. And one of the things that you'll recognize about hypervisor attacks is that the headline when you see the attack is not going to say, big company experiences hypervisor attack. It's going to say, big company experienced an attack that caused hundreds of millions of dollars of damage. And so a good example of this would be the attacks against MGM, for example, in October of 2023. It was a very significant attack against MGM casinos that happened. And if you actually dug underneath the hood of the articles that were talking about all the damage from the attack, the impact and where the attack actually happened was on the hypervisor. And then this year, there have been tons of attacks by a threat group called Scattered Spider. So Scattered Spider has been going after organizations like the Co-op, for example, and other organizations in the UK. They've cost hundreds of millions of dollars of damage to these companies. And again, the headline is not Co-op experiences a hypervisor attack. The headline is Co-op experiences an attack that cost them $200 million of revenue or whatever the number is. And so you have to actually dig a little bit. But our job as the vendor is to sort of bring that story to the forefront and help people recognize, hey, these attacks that are happening, here's how they're happening, here's why they're happening, and here's what we can do to stop it. And part of what we do is not just sell our own product, it's also to educate the market about here's what you should be doing to secure your hypervisor. We believe we have a strong solution for it, but we're not the only thing that you should be doing. There are other tactics and techniques that you can use to protect your hypervisor from these sorts of attacks. And we make sure to emphasize that in our marketing content and in the talks and various events that we do as well. So I definitely think that it's an area where we're responsible for educating the market to an extent. And if there's an organization that has already experienced attack, then they already know exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, really interesting. And Austin, I've been listening in to some of your fantastic answers. I had a quick one to jump in with, and then some more questions on Vali Cyber and hypervisors. You mentioned that hypervisors haven't always grabbed the headlines. Why do you think it's been overlooked sometimes, would you say? You also said that you guys are a market leader and one of the only businesses with the approach that you're taking on that part of the industry. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that it's often overlooked?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the attacks against hypervisors have been increasing in frequency and severity only within the last 3 years. So it's a relatively new problem. And the reason that attackers are going after these systems when they haven't so much in the past is because detection and response on traditional systems like a Windows system, they've gotten better. So it's harder for an attacker to launch an attack purely against Windows because security solutions there are stronger. But the attacker can get into an area of the environment where there's no security solution, where there's no EDR product that's running and protecting the system. You can dwell there for as long as you want without being detected. And the hypervisor is a very privileged position because the other thing that attackers have recognized is when they launch a ransomware attack, let's say they launch a ransomware attack against a bunch of Windows systems. Each Windows system has to have malware deployed onto it, and they have to run that malware successfully. They have to encrypt the system before they can move on. What the hypervisor does, it's a system that will run all these other Windows systems or Linux systems or whatever type of operating system you might be using on top of it. So the ransomware actor only needs to attack one system and they can impact hundreds or maybe even thousands all at once. And so not only is there a benefit in the fact that they're unlikely to be detected because there's very little detection and response capability there, they can impact a huge portion of an organization's IT stack just from one point. And when that happens, when a company's public cloud or private cloud goes down and they're not able to run these systems, it has a significant immediate business impact that is very costly, very expensive. And so the company is very motivated to recover, and thus they're very motivated to pay a heavy ransom to the threat actor so that they can get their systems unlocked and get them back online. So I think there's definitely been a renaissance for attackers where they've recognized the value in going after these systems and what can be achieved. And that's been demonstrated by all these successful attacks that have happened. And so now it's just going to continue to happen more and more because attackers recognize it's working.
How do you think that's going to change as well? How do you think the attackers are going to continue to position themselves moving forward? Because obviously security is often a sort of cat and mouse game where you're trying to understand the behaviors and actions of attackers and defend in the best possible way. How do you anticipate cyber attacks, particularly on via hypervisors, to evolve over time?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to be giving a webinar about this topic in January to kick off the new year. But I think one of the big insights that we have is there's a particular hypervisor called VMware ESXi. And this is what it experiences the vast majority of the attacks because it's the most popular hypervisor out there. So if you think about a threat actor that's building their malware, they want to build malware for a system that's most prevalent, most common, because that's where they're going to get the most bang for their buck. However, There's been the Broadcom acquisition of VMware that's changed the market quite a bit. There are smaller organizations that are moving off of VMware onto other platforms like Nutanix or Proxmox. And what we're seeing now are some of the first malware samples developed for these other types of hypervisors like Nutanix AHV. CISA, the security agency for the United States, they posted an article. It was early last week, and they identified the first use of a ransomware attack against Nutanix AHV, which is an alternative hypervisor. So I think something that we're going to see quite a bit in 26 and then continuing years are hypervisor attacks against different types of hypervisors. Now, from our perspective, we can protect them all because the vast majority of hypervisors are Linux-based. Either it's an ESXi system, which is sort of its own thing. It's a Linux-based system, which is something that we can protect based on our company our heritage as a Linux security company. And then there are companies that also use Microsoft Hyper-V, which is another Microsoft-based option. But the majority of the attacks that we're seeing right now are against ESXi. I think we'll see more against these other platforms as time goes on.
And do you think that, cloud-based environments or more of the kind of air gap systems, like what kind of environments and systems do you think are, will face the most pressure in this area?
Well, really is both with a lot of these attacks, because the way these threat actors traverse and navigate through the network, typically they start in the cloud environment. And so this is what Scattered Spider does quite a bit. So they will begin their attacks in the cloud environment. They will traverse through the cloud network, and they will gain access to the private cloud or the private servers. And so they're not really air gapped. I mean, an air gap system, it's got to have no network connectivity. They are connected to corporate enterprise networks. Maybe they're protected by a VPN, for example, a corporate VPN. But because the attacker has access to the enterprise's cloud environment, they can get out onto that private network and then start going after the hypervisor. So I think both areas have a place in these sorts of attack chains. I think better cloud detection and response can help organizations stop these threats earlier. But having detection and response on the actual system that gets impacted is going to be very critical as well.
Do you see AI making a big impact on on securing some of these systems, particularly from a hypervisor perspective?
I think AI is definitely going to have a profound impact on security, just like it will on so many different verticals and domains. I think that what AI is going to do for attackers is it will allow them to first gain initial access more easily. They can do things like fake a voice using AI, or they can generate very sophisticated and very targeted phishing campaigns and spear phishing campaigns. And you think of these folks that are launching these attacks, some of them might not speak English so well, but with access to something like ChatGPT, they can now write a perfect email that sounds very legitimate. And I think you'll see a lot of activity on that side of things. When the attacker actually gets the hypervisor themselves, I think they're not going to have to change what they're doing too much, whether it's with or without AI, because the security capabilities of the hypervisor are not developing fast enough. And that's why Vali Cyber is here to try and save the day, try to protect these systems, because we are taking sort of quantum leap and protecting these systems. And once that sort of security becomes more prevalent, then attackers might need to use AI or additional capabilities to try and bypass it, try to get around it. And that's how the cat and mouse game happens. But for the current standpoint, I think attackers will use AI a lot for initial access, but once they're in, they can use the same exact scripts and malware and techniques that they've been using for the past few years, because those approaches still work. And attackers are just like us. They're not going to do work just for the heck of it. They're going to do it because it actually provides them some value. They already have a capability that works. That's what they're going to do.
Yeah. Fantastic. Honestly, I appreciate all your answers. You've made it sound all very simple and straightforward on a topic that I know some people will find intimidating as well. So thank you for explaining everything in such detail. I really appreciate it. I think we are on to our final question for the podcast today, and it's always the same. And I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on this one. What one piece of advice would you personally give to someone entering the industry today?
Yeah, so I think for newcomers into the industry, it's just like you said, it can be very intimidating to pick what to start with or to know how to begin. And I think the key thing you have to recognize, it's not as important of how you begin. You might ask, what's the best programming language for me to choose? Should I use C++? Should I use Python? You can spend forever asking yourself all these questions of the best way to start something. But what you need to do is you need to start. You actually need to start the process, because the process is what matters. It's not necessarily the approach that you take initially. It's just picking something and then sticking with it. So once you pick a direction, maybe you pick out a book that's about programming that you want to learn about computers. Finish the book. Don't get through the first 20 pages and then move on to something else. Finish the whole book, stay persistent, stay with it, and keep learning it through to the end. And that will give you a base of knowledge to then grow from. And then as you gain more experience, as you gain more knowledge, then you'll have the knowledge to be able to decide what is the best thing to spend your time on, what is the best thing to be learning. But for a very novice person who's just getting into things, the key thing is just to start, to pick something that's relevant and to stick with it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Starting things is often the hardest bit, right? So I think that's brilliant advice. Inspirational stuff. Austin, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really great to hear all your thoughts and insights. And
yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.